Hello, welcome everyone to episode 11 of Wicky's Cricket Podcast. Welcome to Shane.
Hi, Nakul. It's good that we're doing these regularly, so we actually have to keep track of what episodes happened when. So we double checked right before we started recording. Yes, the last one was number 10, this one's number 11. Hopefully, we're going to come out with these a bit more regularly now that you've got so much cricket to look forward to. So much
100%.
more.
Well, it's actually going to be an exciting few weeks. So we've got about a month. I'm just looking at the date again. Almost exactly a month now left in the Cricket World Cup. WBBL starts tomorrow, which is Thursday, the 19th
Yep.
of October. And then obviously a bunch of cricket across December and January. And I'll be there in India in person pretty much the day after the World Cup final. So I'll be in India for about 6 weeks. So we'll be recording podcasts in person. We did have a bunch of plans to get guests on the podcast, and that was kind of coincidentally around the end of the NRL season when things just became a bit too hectic for us. But we definitely will do that like pretty much from next week onwards, which will be heaps of fun. So we'll get a little bit more variety, so it's not just Shane and I every time around. But let's so just very quickly for this podcast, we're going to be ripping into the Cricket World Cup and also the WBBL. So Shane knows a lot more than me in terms of WBBL, but because of him, I did get into it a little bit more last year and watching a little bit more cricket this year. I'm actually so much more keen to get into this year. I think it feels like it's just like the time with the Men's Cricket World Cup in the evening, and I'm hoping quite a few games for the WBBL here for us in a good time to Australia. So it's going to be a really nice mix. And we will have a lot more cricket stuff coming out from Wiki. So if you Google Wiki Linktree, you can join our Discord. You can check out a lot more content. And yeah, let's get straight into it.
Oh, I should flag really quickly that the BBL Supercoach is finally live for the 23-24 season. That's the big thing that sort of lit up BBL Supercoach Twitter. That's the one thing I saw on the wiki timeline. Pretty much everybody is celebrating. Yeah, let's get our teams together, etc. So that's something we're also going to be covering quite a bit over the next, until it starts, and then obviously when the tournament actually starts and the competition actually starts. So we've got some really, really cool stuff that we're working on. Possibly new podcast. I don't want to commit to saying anything right now,
Let's
but
commit.
possibly new podcast. Yeah.
It may have to be semi-regular if I get another case of Delhi belly or get sick in my 6 weeks in India. I don't know about the regularity, but we'll definitely be doing a whole bunch of BBL Supercoach stuff, which we'll announce soon. I think it's almost exactly 2 months till the BBL as well. I keep forgetting the exact date. Is it December 19 or December 14?
No, I think it's a bit earlier than that.
Okay, well, whatever.
Slightly earlier, but not much earlier.
6-7 weeks left to for BBL to start as well. We'll have a ton of BBL Supercoach stuff coming up. We'll have a chat to a few of the people that we either collabed with last year or we're looking to collab with this year. So yeah, it's going to be super, super exciting couple of months of cricket coming up. But yeah, let's get into the Cricket World Cup. I think we didn't have this in our notes, but I'll very quickly give in a couple of sentences for India, Pakistan. It looked like it was going to be a great game at one point, and then Pakistan did what unfortunately Pakistan's batting is known for, crumbled everywhere. And honestly, I've got to say, as much as a lot of people want to see good games of cricket, the game still ended up at about 2 a.m. Aussie time, I think. And I had my wife sort of passing out on one side and snoring, and had one of my best mates on the other side sleeping. I don't think we could have made it if it went any longer. So for in Australia, I'm very thankful that Pakistan collapsed and made an easier game for India. But I don't know. I've just got a little bit of a feeling that it may not be the last time that India and Pakistan play each other in this World Cup. And I'm sure
you're going. You're going for India or Pakistan both in the top four.
I'm just hoping so. Like when it comes to probably not the smartest thing to say as the founder of a cricket analytics company, but when it comes to these major tournaments, I'm pretty one-eyed, and I just want to see India make it through. And it would just be, I think the India-Pakistan matchup, now that I've seen the game play out once, I think it's actually a really good matchup for India as well. So at this point, I just want India to make it through. I'm just sick of the continued heartbreak at major tournaments. I just want to have a happy ending for all us Indian cricket.
Okay.
But anyways,
okay. So no, I was just going to sort of build on that and say that wasn't a particularly exciting game, but we did have a couple of very exciting, very, very significant World Cup results since then. The day after India Pakistan, we saw Afghanistan beat England in Delhi. It was after losing all their games at the last World Cup and just being belted by Owen Morgan
Mm.
um, against England last time, Afghanistan did it. They actually went and they won, and they beat England, and they beat the holders of the World Cup. And just yesterday, that was the Tuesday night. I mean, ODI cricket runs for the whole day, so day, night, whatever. um, the Netherlands beat South Africa. So, and it's just like it's the first thing that came to my mind as I watched the sort of gradual end to the South African innings and the Netherlands like taking one step, like a step closer to victory with each wicket. I just thought, man, the moment we expect something from South Africa, the moment we start talking them up, they dust off the choke and they bring it back. And but man, Netherlands were really good. Like they were really, really good, and it was it was fantastic to watch. And now I think we've got a real tournament on our hands.
Yep. Well, I just wanted to say, in terms of the two upsets, so look, I unfortunately don't get to watch as much international cricket as I would, mainly as I always say, because of the time zones. But I thought it was really interesting. I do watch a lot of podcasts because ever since I was a kid, like I did love watching cricket, but just as much as the cricket, I love the commentary and I love the previews and the reviews. So because of the time zone, because we don't get to watch a lot of cricket live, I usually sort of watch as much as I can, watch the highlights, and then watch things like The Final Word, The Great Cricketer, etc., right? And a few of the interesting storylines were they were saying that Mohammad Nabi has now beaten 43
Yep.
international countries as a cricketer.
Yep.
What the hell? That is just
Yeah.
that is absolutely crazy. And as I was listening to that, I was like, yeah, the journey of Afghanistani cricket in the last 10 plus years, I'm not sure exactly how many years now, but just over
Yep.
a decade or so, is just ridiculous. And like, I think about it's
Mm.
like India's gone from being this sort of like, weaker country and sort of always being overawed against overseas countries, maybe when I was a kid 20, 25 years ago, to now it's like, well, BCCI, like India has all the money, IPL, etc., right? So
Mm.
it's hard to it's hard to think back to when India was one of those countries that was always struggling. But
Mm.
I'm just thinking of like the people in Afghanistan, the cricket fans, the kids growing up. What an inspiration it would be to be, a 15 or 20-year-old now and to grow up with this crop of players playing.
Mm.
That's absolutely awesome. But I knew very little about the Dutch cricket team, but I think it was on the Final Word today when I was listening to the
Mm.
stories of a lot of the Dutch players, and I think there's the more, I think there's a few people of South African descent, and that's, I guess, a more well-known story. But I think the other
Mm.
thing that I was saying, what was it? There was one of the guys who was like doing Uber, like driving Ubers to sort of make ends meet.
On Mikaran, yeah.
Recently. And a whole bunch of other really interesting stories, and it got me thinking. And the other one is like people who either are from India or other subcontinental countries or wherever, and they've migrated, and I think they've got to do a few years before they can be eligible for the Netherlands, and it just got me thinking like what a path that would be. Like if you're someone who lives in, Australia, India,
Mm.
wherever, and you can't quite crack it into that national team, to sort of uproot your whole life, commit to 5 or 10 years of living in another country, and then have the opportunity
Mm.
to go play in the World Cup, and then actually take on
Mm.
like a who they be like like a Rabada or whoever, really. Like what a journey.
Mm.
I don't know if you have any
Yeah.
additional insights, but the stuff from those podcasts, it really blew me away to really think about like what
Mm.
guys have been through to get there.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, some of the guys, as you mentioned, we actually know about them. I mean, who
Mm.
doesn't know about Rolo Phantom? Uh,
Mm.
and
He played for
like so,
RCB as well, right?
yeah, I think so. I was just thinking, like sort of while you were talking about Afghanistan and how they've sort of come up on the world stage and become a regular participant at World Cups, and like it's obviously a massive achievement to beat England, holders of the World Cup, revolutionize, like kind of like at the cutting edge of the white ball game as well. So kind of like a side with the most modern approach as well as the trophies to show for it. But I'm like, it's not like these players aren't really unknowns at all. Like we see them all year round in the T20 leagues. I mean, even if you just watch the Big Bash, you're very familiar with who Rashid Khan is and who Mujib is, and
Mm.
you've got to know these players. So I feel like in some strange way, it's not like they don't have that kind of unknown Like,
Mm.
what's so significant about their victory? Even so much that like this is like an unknown side that we just didn't know about, who just stunned the world champions. But they're they've actually done the hard yards, and we've seen them sort of mature as players and become global superstars and become like regular fixtures on the T20 circuit, which is the like the fastest growing and most commercially lucrative part of the game. And like they've translated that into like hard won World Cup success now. I feel like it's a it's it's a very different kind of joy of World Cup cricket from some of the ones that we've known before. I know if you're a certain age, you probably thought about Kenya in a very different way.
Yes.
In the the excitement that
Mid
they
90s, early
provided in the
2000s. Yeah.
2003 and 1990, yeah, 1996 World Cups as well, when they beat the West Indies, etc. And it's it's a little bit like that for the Netherlands as well. Obviously, not to the same degree, because I mean they don't have 5 6 years playing in the IPL, and we don't know them through that. So I feel like the Netherlands is a bit more like that, like
Yep.
only a little bit more, not so much more. Um, but I feel like this is very much like we know who these people are, and they and we know who these players are, and we know their journey, and they're now
Mm.
getting that success.
Well, I
I feel
think
like it's a very
before
different kind of success. Yeah.
kind of success. Yeah. Well, before we get on to the games that are coming up, I thought, as always, with my input into this podcast, it's always random stories, and I tried to think of like how long we've known Rashid Khan, at least in Australia. And I remember being at one of my friend's Bucks parties in early 2018. So it would have been the BBL of Afghanistan 2018. And I remember it was like the
Yeah.
last game of the group stages, I think, being
Mhm.
many a drink in and thinking we need Rashid Khan to hold on because we had a futures bet on him to get the most wickets in the BBL.
Yeah.
Think I assume if he was a good price and I didn't know who he was till my friend told me
Hmm.
that it would have been his first BBL or maybe his second. So he's been around
Hmm.
in, the T20 circuit for let's say roughly the last 6 7 years or so. And obviously like he was one of the first, not the first, but he was one of the first to kind of become that global superstar. So that's it's just over a decade or whatever of being around, and in the last
Hmm.
5 6 years of having a few different people come on the circuit, it's been
Yeah.
meteoric rise, and yeah, really nice to see. Obviously, as just a cricket
Yeah.
person. Let's get on to. I was gonna.
Really, yeah. Just like real quickly, maybe like 2 minutes on this, but
Yeah.
so now I think the tournament has, because we said it's kind of like it's shook things up, right? Because Afghanistan now play New Zealand today. We're recording this on the Wednesday, and they play Pakistan right after that. Not right after, but like few days after. Netherlands now play Sri Lanka, who are winless, having lost to Australia. Uh, and honestly, I don't know if Sri Lanka win that now. And then the Netherlands play Australia in Delhi. So that's very interesting games for both Afghanistan and Netherlands. And it's
Mm,
a huge weekend coming up in the World Cup, because we're going to see Australia versus Pakistan in Bangalore. We're going to see England versus South Africa in Mumbai, and we're going to see India v New Zealand in Dharamshala on Sunday.
wow. Wow.
So that last one could have, I think, both teams could have 100% records heading into that game, assuming New Zealand win today.
Mm,
So India and New Zealand would have won all of their games in the tournament going into Sunday.
yep. No, it's going to be a cracking weekend. I will say, and it's funny, we were having like a disagreement on our Discord channel as well, and I actually had the same
Yeah.
disagreement with a few friends. Like, I don't necessarily think that I think a lot of people are saying after that Australia Sri Lanka game that Sri Lanka's
Hmm.
struggling, or wow, Australia, what a great win, they're back in it now. I think that's ridiculous. Like, sorry, the Australia part of it is ridiculous because I'm pretty sure I looked at the like I don't usually bet on the result of cricket games for no reason, but I do have a look at the odds to get a gauge
Hmm.
of, like obviously what the
Yeah.
thoughts are, how far these teams seem to be. I'm pretty sure Australia was like $1.10 or something similar, and Sri Lanka was maybe $6 or $7 odds. I might be wrong here, but I'm pretty sure pre-game Sri Lanka were like huge outsiders. And yes, they started really well, right? and
Hmm.
they obviously crumbled. And yeah, Australia obviously like ended up looking good, but there was still quite a few things on the day to make me think that Australia, like I don't think like Australia, A, they were favorites, B, they were strong favorites, and they were always expected to win this game. So yes, they won the game. They still had Mana scoring 40 off 60. They still have Warner and Smith failing. They still had Inglis with a drop catch. Ah, I know he was a keeper, whatever, it's tricky. They had something else. They had that really shitty review at the start that cost them another review later. Like
Oh yeah, that was awful.
that
The
was
stock
yeah, and
review,
that
yeah.
start with the three sort of bailout man cat attempts. Like I think there's still a lot of negatives with the Aussie performance, and I don't think
Yeah.
I don't think it was a huge deal for them to lose to
Mm.
India or South Africa. The way
Yeah.
they lost was a problem, and I get that. But
Mm.
I also don't think
Mm.
that this win against Sri Lanka fixes very much. Like, yeah, morale boost and
Sure.
stuff. But
Yeah.
this Australia-Pakistan game, I'm pretty like I'm
Mm.
so confident that whichever team loses this will just spiral out of control. And like you
Yeah.
can just
Yeah.
like obviously I'm biased by a lot of the podcasts that I listen to and stuff because the people that sort of the great cricketer and final word etc. They just watch a lot more international cricket than most people living in Australia do,
Mm.
including myself. And I
Mm.
love cricket, but I just don't consume as much of it as they do. So a lot of my opinions
Mm.
form of players, etc., is driven by a lot of these podcasts and people that are on them.
Yeah.
And I just think like you could just picture it, right? So if Pakistan loses, for example, it's like, the spinners aren't good enough, Shaheen's not doing enough, Nazim Shah's out,
Mm.
the batting just couldn't get enough runs again. If they've lost
Yeah.
against India and Australia, don't see them
Mm.
kind of fighting back from that. Like they don't have the punch.
Yeah.
Whereas Australia, I've maintained from the start they don't have the punch. So like a
Mm.
win against Sri Lanka changes nothing if it
Yeah.
is followed up by that loss to Pakistan. That's it for them. And
Mm.
the writing's on the wall. Injuries all over the place, not prioritizing 50 over cricket, players exhausted
Mm.
after a bunch of different red and
It's the
white
same group.
all year.
Yeah.
Nothing's
They've been
changed.
away in India, away in England this year. They've had a
IPL
fairly
as
grueling
well.
2023. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. IPL, exactly. The only thing I'd sort of say to sort of counter that is, well, just look at the table right now. There are now four. I'm looking at it right now. By the way. There are now one, two, three, four, five teams who are 1-2.
Yep.
One win, two defeats. That's Afghanistan, Netherlands, Bangladesh, England, and Australia. I think this tournament is still wide open, which is why even if you're in crisis right now, which well, you just went through all of those reasons why you might consider Australia in crisis. You also explained that they don't. That wasn't like one win against Sri Lanka doesn't really change all that much in the grand scheme of things. But I think with the fourth and possibly even third qualifying spot just so wide open at the moment, I
Mm.
don't think you need to clear a very high bar in order to qualify.
Yeah.
And from then on, it's knockout games. It's two knockout games you need to win, and you know
Oh,
Australia knockout games.
yeah, like I don't even think it's fair enough. Historically, yes, Australian knockout games. We will move on to the WBBL after this, but I think the
Yes.
other thing I'll think of is okay. I am biased against New Zealand. I just like many people, I just don't rate them. But no, like I think with the loss of Kane Williamson now, and I don't actually think they're locked in either. I think without Kane Williamson, if they do lose to
Yeah.
obviously India's, it wouldn't be a surprise if New Zealand did lose to India, and if they lose one of their other games against like a non sort of Netherlands Afghanistan type of team, if they lose two of the next three or whatever, I think they kind of obviously, as you just said, go back to the pack. So I think it's pretty much like India
Mm.
is close to a certainty unless there's some huge injuries or surprise results, etc. But I think they're the only team pretty much that I would say should make the finals. I think it's going to be
Mm.
incredible World Cup now because of these couple of like upsets,
Mm.
sort of surprising
Yeah.
results. It kind of opens it up, and with
Mm.
with a tournament like the World Cup, there's no advantage to coming first and second because usually it's like in an NRL or AFL, for example, it's like the advantage
Yeah.
is you get a
You advance
double
straight to the
chance.
final.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, like
The
you
grand
go
final.
straight to the
Yeah.
final, you get a double chance, you get home ground advantage.
Mm.
There's none of that, right?
Yeah.
And there's no even like
Mm.
clear third or fourth, like best team is weaker than first or second. Like I would say
Yeah.
India is probably just now I've watched a few games. I would definitely say that they deserve to be favorites. But out of New
Yeah.
Zealand, South Africa, England, Pakistan, let's just say Australia, even those five teams,
Mm.
I can't really be convinced that any of them is sort of
Yeah.
noticeably better than the other. So yeah,
Uh-huh.
mm,
Yeah. No, which is why I brought up the sort of low bar thing that even if you don't
yeah,
have to scrape together too many wins in order to qualify, then it's anybody's game in the semifinals from there. Two things really quickly before we move on. One, I'd say India do have home ground advantage.
Oh, like they do, but yeah, I don't know.
I
Like,
mean, they have home ground advantage
of
throughout the
course,
whole
like I get
tournament.
it, it's in India, but I don't know.
It's
Where
okay,
are
making
the
a joke.
semis again?
Do
Mumbai and
Calcutta and Bombay, I think.
that's
Yes,
right. Yeah,
Calcutta and
yeah,
Bombay.
yeah. Okay, cool. Well, we'll obviously talk about that later on, but
Hmm.
I'm
Um,
very keen on a future podcast to like really dive into some venue stuff for the World Cup, and
hmm.
next week might be a good time to do it because we'll be pretty much halfway through the World Cup,
Yes,
and I'd love to
yes,
deep dive
yes.
on venues.
See how these surfaces are playing. Yeah, 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 yeah. Last thing, it's interesting that you say you don't rate New Zealand and fans like just think they might spiral, like fall back into the pack. But you think India are pretty much guaranteed to make the final when both teams are currently 3 wins from three, and after today, New Zealand could be 4 wins from four. So New Zealand will be top of the table heading into the Sunday game,
Yep.
and I think so, which
It's
is
like
interesting.
it's a weird example, right? But like I'm not
Yeah.
too fussed by the table because it's uh, obviously every
Hmm.
team has played a varied range of opposition, and it's like it's like in some sports. I'm not sure what football's like, but in NRL and AFL, there's like teams can have the bye at different times, and when you have the bye, which means you don't play, you get those 2 points, and basically by say round seven, which is like a third of the way through the season or whatever. Some
Hmm.
teams like it's really jumbled up because some teams have their 2 points for a bye, some teams haven't got that yet, some teams have
Hmm.
versed a bunch of top four teams, some teams have had a really
Yeah.
easy run, etc., etc. Right? So like I don't know,
Yeah.
I'm very much like I won't change my opinions on teams until probably next week. Like as we're talking about, there's a bunch of
Hmm.
really good games this weekend. Most
Yes.
teams will probably play another couple of games before we do our next podcast. And if by then,
Mm.
if Australia's sitting at 3 wins and 2 losses, for example, I'd be like, yeah, okay, fine, I'll change my opinion.
Yeah.
But at this stage,
Yep.
especially with that Kane Williamson injury, I'm very
Mm.
interested to see if New Zealand do lose a couple of the next three, and I can yeah, I can sort of brag about that on the next podcast. We'll see how we go. Um,
Okay.
but
All right.
anyway,
Cool. Let's move on. We could
oh,
honestly keep going on and on
oh,
about
we
this because
very
there's a
much
lot to talk
could. Yes, I think it's the wrong
about. Okay.
idea. I'm
Yes.
going to stop having coffees before we record these podcasts. We're gonna keep going over. So I'll just
Mm.
what's it called, introduce the WBBL section of the pod. Um,
Mm.
my sort of like general proviso is that for most cricket fans, obviously women's cricket is something that we're excited about. We want to know more about, but a lot of us just don't know all the players and always need context. So Shane is super knowledgeable about his WBBL or women's cricket in general. We've been pretty fortunate at Wicky where a lot of the women's cricket work that we are looking to do, we're in a really good position to smash a lot of that stuff out, whether it's analysis, previews, etc., which we will be doing. And what I said to Sashane is like when we do go through the sort of WBBL section of the pod, it needs to sort of start off with the basis of just pretend people don't know very little about women's cricket. They don't know a lot of the players. They might know some of the sort of big name internationals. So yeah, let's get straight into it. But please spare a
Sure.
thought, Shane, for us who are looking to learn more
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
the game, and then
No, of course.
get more
Yeah.
into.
Yeah. Sure. So I think especially with the latest set of changes to the BBL now, where we're going to have a shorter season, um, as compared to what it was before. The WBBL is now fully like a very, very different beast from the BBL. So although the teams are like exactly the same, where it's a very different tournament structure. It's a very different ball game, I think. So it's you have to use a slightly different frame of reference when approaching the WBBL, let's say for the first time, or if you don't know too much about it. But yeah, it's very different from the BBL now. It's still a 14 game per team season, so it's got a full season, so 56 games. And there's a week of finals. So it starts tomorrow. Um, yes, it starts tomorrow and it ends in early December at some stage. I think the second is when the final is. Um, the Adelaide Strikers are the defending champions. They beat the Sydney Sixers in the final last year. Um, there's been actually a lot of activity. Like it's been a very sort of like a time of sea change for the WBBL because if you followed it not too long ago, there was a draft. There was a BBL draft and there was a WBBL draft, which was the first time that they used this method um, of players, or rather of teams choosing players for the WBBL. And that led to some very, very interesting squad building, strategy, tactics, all that kind of stuff. So I think the teams, like a lot of the WBBL teams, have been tested in very, very different ways, particularly in recent years. This year it was the BBL draft in terms of squad building and strategy, etc. Last year was, for example, the first time the WBBL introduced the power surge, which is something you've seen in the BBL before. So last year was the first time that teams actually dealt with a shortened mandatory power play, and then they could use the 2 overs at any other stage in the innings later on in the innings. Um, so there's actually been a lot of change in the way that people do things, from the contracting system to how players are selected, to how the games actually unfold, to the schedule, to the venues, all of this kind of stuff. So they're going to be playing. I think it's called Stadium Week, something like that, where they're actually going to be playing at a lot of big grounds, pretty much for the first time since the
Oh,
WBBL
nice.
became like its own thing. So there's a Stars Renegades game at MCG, I think,
Oh, how good.
sometime in November. Yeah, so they're going to be playing in um, the SCG, the MCG. They're going to be playing at the Adelaide Oval, so like two or three other grounds.
Okay.
But yeah, so that's actually sort of like a big picture version of what's been going on with the WBBL lately.
Cool.
Let's get to the
Can I
teams.
just
Let's
go?
get to the team.
Yeah, yeah, I
Yeah,
was
yeah.
just going
Sorry,
to
go
butt
ahead.
in a little bit. So we've got a little bit of analysis to sort of finish off.
Hmm.
I just wanted to ask, I know you've obviously prepared a few points, but just high level stuff. Like obviously with the men's Big Bash, we know that Perth and Sydney, like Perth Scorchers, Sydney
Yeah.
Sixers have obviously been two of the dominant teams. A lot of the sort of like international superstars that come are usually household names. So can you give us a
Hmm.
little bit of intro into teams wise, like what are we expecting with the women's big, or what are you expecting with the women's Big Bash this year?
Hmm.
Sort of two or three teams to look out for.
Yeah. So I should sort of preface this by saying that the draft has actually changed up the squads quite a bit. So you might
Nice.
have to look in other places as well for teams to watch out for. But I will say that season before last, both Scorchers won the WBPL. They won it basically on the axis of the Beth Mooney Sophie Devine opening axis. Just dominated the whole tournament, and they were excellent. They weren't quite as hot last year, but instead, the Sydney Sixers really stepped up. Now, the Sydney Sixers are they're the team that you will recognize the most players from. They have the most well-known players.
Right.
They got the big ticket stars. They've got Perry. They've got Healy. They've got Gardner. Basically, anybody that you followed from, like, even casually sort of followed the Australian women's team, they'll have a lot of players from there. They also had Sophie Eccleston last year. She's not going to be playing this season because of injury. So one of the big challenges for the Sydney Sixers is how do we replace Eccleston? And there's like a very interesting sort of like whole thing that Charlotte Edwards, the coach, has gone into about, like she's actually broken down her thought process in terms of the recruits that they've got to fill in that Eccleston shaped hold. And I'm probably going to look at some numbers and put out some interesting stats and content over the course of the next few days, um, just to see how her analysis of the situation stands up, and how it's going to go. Strikers are the defending champs. They're going to be definitely going to be worth watching out for. They've got a very, very good bowling attack. They're just like a pretty good unit, all like top to bottom. And I think, um, man, I don't know. Like although the Sixers are like really stacked, my two favorite Sixers players aren't the ones who play for Australia right now. So I was honestly glad that the Strikers beat them in the final last year. Like, you're a good team. Like the Sixers are a good team, but I find them difficult to love. Like, yeah, you got all the big players. Like I don't see what
I think
I'm
that's like most fans, right?
supposed
Like,
to.
especially if you don't know
Yeah.
a competition or if you're new to a sport or a competition, you definitely don't want
Hmm.
the strong favorites to win.
Yeah.
I'm gonna cheat a little bit. I was just looking through your notes real quick, and I noticed that Herman
Hmm.
God and Haley Matthews play for the same team. I don't need to do any
Yes.
more homework. I don't need to hear anything else. Tell me who they play for and tell me why they'll win.
So they're part of the Melbourne Renegades squad. The Renegades are going to play their first game on the Friday afternoon,
Cool.
um,
I'll be
and they're
watching.
going to be playing the Brisbane Heat. So Brisbane Heat are like kind of like the like they're the consistent team that makes the finals, but they aren't quite able to make that final step up into
South Africa.
actually turning that. Yeah. But I do like the Heat. I mean, they are a great side. They've got like a lot of like talent top to bottom to boast of. Uh, but I honestly think that the three teams who finished bottom of the ladder last season, so the bottom three, they're going to be the ones to watch out for this season. So let me just go through the last season's ladder really quick. So it went Sixers, Strikers, Heat, Hurricanes, Scorchers, Stars, Renegades, Thunder. And I think the last three on that list, the Stars, the Renegades, and Thunder, they're going to be they're going to be like very, very exciting to watch this season. They've recruited heavily in the draft, and they're like strongly expected to climb the ladder. You mentioned Harmanpreet Kaur and Haley Matthews at the Renegades. They're like now the Renegades have a lot of firepower. They have a lot of overs in that team. They're 100% going to be worth watching. And Thunder and Stars are the other two teams that are like I've got kind of got my eye on. I think everybody's got their eye on for
I
what they're
might
going
have
to
to do a
do.
little bit of shopping.
Um,
I think I told you, like, if I get into a new sport
hmm,
or a new competition I don't know too much about, I always have a look at the betting odds just to get an idea of like who
hmm,
most people think the favorites are and who seem to be some of the worst teams. So I'm just looking at the odds on one of the sites here, and the
yep.
Renegades, Thunder, and Stars are in the three of the bottom four teams in the betting odds. So
Hmm,
a lot of the times,
hmm,
like obviously these people don't follow women's cricket as closely as you do, and they're probably just judging
yep.
off last year's ladder with some small tweaks.
Yep.
But the
Yep.
Renegades, if they've got Harmanpreet Kaur, a little bit of Indian, or an Indian player in there, and Haley Matthews, I saw what she did recently against Australia.
Hmm.
The T20s that she got a 130 or was it 160? Some
It's
ridiculous goal.
incredible. Like just so many runs.
And
Yeah.
she gets
Yeah. Yeah.
wickets
Yeah.
as well. So yeah, I'll
Yeah.
definitely
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Haley Matthews as well. That's awesome.
Hmm.
I'm
They're
excited.
100% going to be worth watching. And I think like for both Melbourne clubs, I think it's going to be a very, very important season. Stars are actually going to play the tournament opener tomorrow against the stacked Sixers team that I mentioned earlier, who made the final.
But Elise
So
Perry's not
like
playing. I
we,
remember I read that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. At least Perry's not playing. That's right. And it's just for the Stars. The other thing to really watch out for the Stars is the return of Meg Lanning. She's finally back. She has already been back, in fairness. She's been playing a bit of WNCL, got a few 50s. She's returned it now. She was missed, I think, last year's Big Bash and also the Ashes. So she's been away from like a lot of like high level action for quite a bit. But you're going to see her now, and she's going to be 100% worth watching out for. Um, Thunder
Um,
are going to be really interesting, I think, because they finished rock bottom. Like they were adrift last season. They only won one out of their 14 games, if you can believe that.
wow.
Um, they got more points from no results than they did from wins.
Is Hannah Darlington back? Because I remember she had a serious injury last year, was it?
Yes, she is back. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, she is
nice.
back. She's in the squad, and she should. I think she should play. I think she was also the captain of. Well, she's not captain now, but she was captain of this team in the past.
Cool.
So
Okay.
they've actually got a really, really. They've actually rounded out their pace attack quite a lot. They picked up Marzan Cap in the draft. Like that was the big move of the WBBL draft,
Yeah.
where Scorchers had this choice of whether they could only retain either Sophie Devine or
Yeah.
Marzan Cap, and they chose to retain Devine and Cap into the draft. And Thunder had first pick, I think, and they picked up Cap in the draft. Um, just all round brilliance, pace bowling, batting, bats in the middle, bowls the difficult overs, just like a star of South Africa's run to a T20 World Cup final on home soil earlier this year. Just like she's going to be the player to watch, I think, at the Thunder. They've also picked up Lauren Bell, who I'm a big fan of, and like just basically looking overseas to like bolster the pace ranks. But I honestly think their spinners are actually going to be really, really important for them to climb up the ladder.
Yeah.
Lauren Smith and Sam Bates, they were by far the Thunder's best bowlers in a very difficult year last year. And honestly, you look at their form and you wonder how did the Thunder only win one game? Um, but like they're going to be very, very important for them to climb back up the ladder. Phoebe Litchfield's going to be in action for the Thunder. Another player who's actually undergone a very, very dramatic reinvention recently. Now, if you're not familiar, she's actually a top order bat.
Yeah.
Bats pretty much top three. Uh, Excellent fielder, etc. But recently for Australia, she's been reinvented as a lower order finisher. sort of
Yeah.
like a somebody who comes in at the end and bashes a very quick 50, which is what she did against the Windies. So because there's all these new recruits at the Thunder, it's going to be very, very interesting to see if Litchfield drops down the order to sort of reprise that finisher role, or they're going to need her at the top. So then she's going to stay there.
Awesome.
That's very,
Okay.
very
Well, I
important
was
to
just going to
consider.
say, like, I'm going to, while you go, do you want to go into the Tableau stuff now? Because I want to make sure we
Yes.
kind of smash through the analysis maybe in a couple of minutes and then wind up. While you do that,
Yes.
I'm finding myself distracted because I really want to know how many WBBL games will be on in the daytime. So I'll let
Yes.
you share your
Yes.
screen and just in a couple of minutes go through the
Yes.
Tableau analysis. In that time, I'm going to
Hmm.
quickly look at the fixtures. So just before we wrap up, I'll tell
Yep.
the Australian-based fans how good the time zones will be for us and how many daytime games.
Yes. Yeah. I hope you can try and get out to some of those games actually, because there's quite a few in Sydney at different grounds.
If there's one near
So
my
yeah.
house, I'll be there.
Sure. Okay, so just for a bit of context about what I'm going to throw up on screen, I'm probably going to throw up when I'm editing this later, I'm going to throw up like a full page visual of what I'm showing on screen right now, just for the sake of clarity. Now, I thought one of the things that would be really interesting to look at was, how did teams cope with the shortened mandatory power play and the long middle overs last season? And what I ended up doing is what you'll see on your screen now is a team by team breakdown of batting strike rates in each of those phases. So overs 1 to 4, overs 5 to 16, and overs 17 to 20. I should caveat this by saying not all middle and death overs are created equal because of the power surge. So some of the later overs might be played under power surge conditions. So that's obviously something that's important to keep in mind. But if you just look at but the Thunder finished dead last season, and they're basically equally tepid in every phase last season. So they struck at 97 in the first 4 overs, 98 in the middle 10, and 105 in the back 4, which is comfortably like the lowest sort of aggregate total of any team here. If
Mm.
you notice, the Sixers made the final. They were actually quite slow to start with, but they really picked it up in the middle and death overs, thanks to Ash Gardner, thanks to Aaron Burns, thanks to like really, really like naturally quick scorers there. You know, that was actually like a big reason for why the Sixers went that far in the tournament, because their ability to just catch up with the rate in the later stages of the game was unmatched. Basically, as you can see, they've got the highest strike rate in the last 4 overs last season, um, and similarly with the Heat, another really consistent team. I think Laura Harris being on form is just a real game changer.
Yeah.
Because they again they were basically the next best team after the Sixers when it came to strike rates through the middle and death overs, which you can sort of see here. They were able to accelerate with time as good as anybody in this league. And I think that's really the sort of you look at all these strike rates at a glance, and that's really the sort of test of how the teams sort of arrange themselves on the table, right?
Yeah.
At various points in the different phases of the game, the Sixers were as slow as anybody in this league. In fact, they were the slowest in the first 4 overs in the mandatory power play. But it was their ability to catch up and accelerate through the middle and latter stages of the game. The same
Mm.
with the Heat, and the same with the strikers, as you can see here at the top of the picture. Um, but it was but what did the this is what the teams who finished at the top did well. But what did the teams who finished at the bottom do badly? They just couldn't accelerate. So it's not really, which is what you see with the Thunder. Their three-phase strike rates are clustered really close together, very similar with the Renegades in the middle of
Yeah.
the picture, and sort of like that with the Stars, although the Stars caught up at the back end better than most
I think it's interesting, right?
last
Like just
season.
looking at this, like I'm kind of thinking of like
Mm,
the men's big bash and what I've seen. I feel like if there's a real skill disparity and you're clearly not one of the strongest squads, you almost like it'd be nice to have a look at this after the season and think, well, maybe
mm,
we do need to play a bit more like the Sixers in that we do sort of
yeah.
conserve our wickets and sort of really play it a bit slower than usual, so we have something for
Mm,
the back end. But I'm keen to see
yeah.
I'm keen to see what else you've got with the Tableau stuff because I'm keen to
Yes.
update the viewers on the some of the fixtures and we'll wrap up.
Yes, of course. So this is just sort of like this is like a very big picture look at how the teams performed, and so catching up is really the name of the game in the post power surge era of the WBBL is essentially the broad conclusion.
Yeah.
Yes, so there's a bit more Tableau stuff that, bit more analysis stuff that I thought would be really cool to look at. Um, okay, so I mentioned a little bit earlier that Sophie Devine and Mazan Cap, the Scotchers had the choice of Sophie Devine versus Mazan Cap in terms of who to retain in the WBBL draft. So I remember sort of like in the post in the sort of post in this sort of like in the pre WBBL draft days, there was this whole thing about oh like it's a very difficult choice. Cap versus Divine of who to retain is a very difficult choice, but it's got to be Cap. It's got to be Cap. It's got to be Cap. That's the talk that I heard a lot of on cricket Twitter, etc. But and I thought about this a little bit, and I thought, I don't think it's that clear cut, because I admit that Divine didn't have a great season with the bat last year at all. Certainly compared to season before last, when she was a very important. Her runs were a very important part of the Scorchers winning the WBBL. But I thought she was really really good with the ball, and I think deserved a bit more credit for how she sort of turned up with the ball. So she was contributing even when she didn't have the runs to show for it. So just this is a bit of a side by side comparison of Cap and Divine from last season. I've added the number of deliveries that they played in they bowled in the different phases of the game for a bit of context. So as you can see here, um, Divine mostly bowled through the middle and Cap mostly bowled at the start and at the end. And they bowled exactly the same number of deliveries in the last four, which is 57. And you can see kind of here that although Cap was definitely the better bowler in terms of overall numbers, if you break it up by economy rate, in terms of taking wickets, in terms of who was better up front, but Divine actually managed to bowl a bit more economically than Cap through the middle overs, which was quite interesting. That's not something I would have thought of initially. Um, whether it was in terms of keeping the runs down, whether you look at the economy rate through the middle, or you look at dot ball percentage in terms of creating pressure, um, it was Divine actually performed a lot better with the ball than I thought that she got credit for. And this is a bit of a look at that middle phase for Sophie Divine that I'm throwing up on screen now. See, this looks so much nicer. It's a very, very colorful scatter plot of everybody who bowled at least the same number of deliveries as Cap did in the middle phase last season. So this is a sort of like a chart mapping out the economy rate and the strike rate. So this is Sophie Divine. Sorry, this is Alana King. My bad. This is Sophie Devine right here. She's um, definitely not the most incisive when it came to taking wickets through the middle. But if you look at sort of like the economy rate down the x-axis, she's mixing it in with the best of them. She's mixing it in with Molly Strano, with Gemma Barsby, with Sophie Eccleston, with Darcy Brown, with Alana King, Ash Gardner, Sophie Molyneux. So she's actually like she was as good as any of them when it came to keeping the runs down through the middle, even if she wasn't quite as incisive. Even if she wasn't quite as good at taking wickets. Just for a last bit of context, because both Divine and Cap bowled the exact same number of deliveries in the final four overs last season, I thought it'd be good to look at a bit of a comparison through in that phase as well. Again, I filtered by all the bowlers who bowled at least as many deliveries in that phase of the game last season, and Divine's right down here, Cap's way up here. So you can kind of tell that Divine wasn't quite as effective in the sort of the final four overs, which is why she's got a very very middling economy rate and the worst strike rate of this group that you see right here. Definitely way off the pace when it comes to the death overs, but definitely mixing it in with the best when it comes to the middle overs. So just like a sort of, I thought it wasn't the worst decision to retain Sophie Devine in the draft, is what I made to say.
Yeah, well, I was thinking like it'll be, like that was awesome. I think like in hindsight, or I think what we can do next time is we can sort of have maybe a little bit more tableau analysis and a little bit less of me waffling on about about random stuff. So I think what we'll
Or
do
me.
definitely, if you haven't planned to do so already, so Shane, definitely get some of this stuff out on cricket Twitter, get
Yes.
some discussion going. I will sorry just go to what I was looking at when I was distracted by a little bit earlier. That analysis was awesome, but I think one of the difficulties I've had previously is like you get excited by these things pre-tournament, and then the tournament starts, and a lot of times you realize in Australia that you just can't watch games. They're too late. They're coincide with other stuff, etc. I looked at the WBBL fixtures, and obviously they had the Men's World Cup in mind, I assume. But if you live in Australia, especially if you live in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, etc., on the East Coast, there are a lot of 3 and 4 p.m. games, essentially a lot of games in the day. And that if you're a cricket fan, it's heaven because you've got WBBL in the day. Obviously, a lot of people don't know all the players and you're not, as invested because you're just sort of getting to know the sport or the comp. But it's the perfect mix because it's on in the background while you're working. You're getting to know what's going on. And then in the evening, obviously, you have the Men's World Cup. So it's going to be a dream month and a half. Or actually, then we have the BBL. So it's going to be a dream summer of cricket. And I'm actually really excited because I was saying that I'm excited to watch the Renegades now. I think I'll pick a team for the WBBL this year with Hannah and Hayley Matthews. Their first game is Friday. Imagine this, 3 p.m. on a Friday, and you're just in Sydney, Melbourne, or wherever you are, and you've just got this on just towards the end of the working week. Everyone's kind of switching off at that point. It's going to be absolutely perfect. So thanks to Shane
so good.
The analysis a little bit. I think it'll be really cool to now see, I think I didn't want to sort of preface the analysis, but I will say now that we've seen some of this analysis, the cool thing will be now that we've seen the first WBBL draft, how will the sort of changed up squads react to some of the stuff from last year? And I do genuinely hope for the teams that obviously didn't do so well this year have sort of got some fresh faces. We can see them come up even towards the middle of the ladder, if not sort of one of them maybe surprise us and come in the top 2. So going to be a really, really exciting next few weeks.
Yep.
Awesome. Cool. All right, guys. As always, Google Wiki Linktree, all our socials, our Discord, all our content will be on there. So Shane will be pumping out quite a bit of the WBBL stuff over the next week. A lot more of the Men's World Cup stuff. I think from next week onwards will be good to go in terms of both WBBL and Men's World Cup stuff in terms of our data and our stats. So we'll be pumping out a lot more of that. The podcast will be coming out a lot more often, and we'll have guests on here as well. So thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.